Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I will be going over my 2019 and 2020 year-to-date reading stats. So I'm coming to you today at a little bit of a different angle and in some groovy blue light blocking glasses because I wanted to show you the spreadsheet that I put together for my reading stats of 2019 and year-to-date of 2020. This is kind of a weird time to do it. We're a little bit over half the year, but I thought it'd be kind of a good time because last year I did not read a lot. And so I'm actually at a higher page count this year than I was at for the entirety of 2019. So I thought it might just be kind of interesting to compare and contrast my reading habits from 2019 to 2020 as I've gotten more and more into reading. So I'm going to switch me down into the corner and I'm going to pop up my spreadsheets. So to start off with, we'll start off with my 2020 just kind of data entry page. So as you can see across the top, I have title, start date, end date, how many days it took me to read, which is just the subtraction of those two dates, pages of the book. So all of this information basically I got off of my Goodreads. I try to keep pretty good track of my progress through a novel through Goodreads, especially during 2020. So this is all pretty accurate. And then I don't know if it's just me because I come from an engineering background, but rates are something that really matter a lot to me and something I find very interesting and very telling. So I did a pages per day just based on pages in the book and how many days it took me to read it. So pretty simple calculation there as well. And then genre, and I did break some of them out into subgenres. Didn't end up super using these, but I did somewhat use it. And then I also have rating. As you can see, I have some gaps here for the Harry Potter series just because I read those more of a nostalgia reread, so I felt like a rating wasn't really fair to give. So yeah, I have all my ratings besides Harry Potter in there. As you can see, I'm a pretty easy to please as far as ratings go. But yeah, as of now, not including how far I've gotten into Children of Virtue and Vengeance, I have read about 6,500 pages in 2020. So jumping over to 2019, as you can see, there are a lot less books and only about 5,000 pages. I have the same setup here. These days read probably aren't as accurate as in 2020, just due to I had to backfill a lot of these earlier ones into Goodreads. And the biggest thing that slumped me down in 2019 was reading East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I was supposed to read this with a friend. He ended up backing out. So it just took me a really long time to slug through this by myself, as you can see from my 3.5 page per day reading rate. So yeah, that definitely, I don't know if it's a reading slump if you're still reading the book, but I definitely slumped through it. Even though I did give this a 5, I thought it was a really worthwhile book, but I would suggest if you are going to slug through this that you read it with somebody else that you can talk to about it. Because I think a lot of what slowed me down was I would read a couple pages and stop to think and just get so mentally exhausted of trying to slog through all of this. I think it'd be a lot easier to do if you're accountable with a friend or have a friend to like talk through some of these larger themes with. But yeah, so that's my 2019. So jumping into some of the fun stuff, I made little pivot tables based off of my 2020 and 2019 data. So this is basically just breakdown by genre, and you can see the pivot table editor. Why did it stop recording? All right, we're back, and we are going to be looking at the graphs again. But yeah, no, running low on space on my computer. Okay, so, okay, percent genre read. So like I said, I have my grand total of pages, and then I made a pivot table based on genre. So that was back to my data entry tables. I had like each genre and then the pages of each book, so that this one just adds up all of the pages in that genre. Pretty simple. And then I just made a little pie chart showing the difference that I've made, or showing the different genres that I've done by percentage. So it looks like this year about half of it's been fantasy, a little bit of thriller, a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of romance, and some nonfiction. And then looking back to 2019, mostly sci-fi because I read through the entire Lunar Chronicles series. So that was a big part of it. A little bit of fantasy, some thrillers, some fiction. But I don't know, something I thought was kind of funny is like this fantasy part, like call that the booktube effect, because so many of the people I initially follow and still follow on booktube are just very heavy into fantasy. So it's something I have been dipping my toes in quite a bit more this year. I mean, typically, you know, before I started with watching booktube and doing booktube videos, I would have said I've been more in like this thriller sci-fi realm. Read a lot of sci-fi, and I read a lot of kind of like adventure, spy, thriller sort of stuff. And this year I've definitely branched out to something new, which is exciting. But I think for the second half of 2020, I'd like to get more into some of the sci-fi and some of the thriller stuff. So another thing I thought was interesting was the rate at which I was reading for all these different genres. And you can see down here, I actually have two different sheets showing the same calculation, but not the same calculation. So like I had in my data entry tables, I did have a reading rate for each individual book. And so when I actually went through and when I first did the pivot tables, I had it do an average reading rate per genre, but I actually messed that up because I had it do an average of each individual reading rates. So instead of being all the pages that I read in fantasy divided by all the days I read fantasy, it actually did like just a numerical average of all of these different rates for fantasy. So if you like look at all of these like fantasy novels, instead of adding up like all of that and dividing it by the days, it just took a numerical average of all of these. So it ended up being way heavily weighted by some of these outliers from Harry Potter. So it says 72 for fantasy and 53 for fantasy in 2019. And so this is just something I wanted to show just so you don't make the same mistake if you end up making pivot tables of your reading rate, which I don't know how many people are actually out there doing, but just something to be aware of. So this is the actual pivot tables of my actual average reading rate. So I had it do the sum of the days read for each non-genre and the sum of the pages, and then just did division that way to get an actual average reading rate overall. So this is my 2020. This is my 2020 without Harry Potter. And I actually haven't done my 2019. So I think this might be a good way to show you guys, if you've never done a pivot table, it's not that hard. Just go to, I just highlight all of my data. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but this is showing what your pivot table is going to pull from. So all of these cells are potential things that my pivot table could pull from. So then data and pivot table, and my data range is already in there. And then I go to existing sheet and I click this little select data range, go over to reading rate calculation. And then I just want to put it at that cell so it all lines up and looks nice, and press OK and create. So for this one, all the rows I want are my genres. And then for values, I want days read and it's going to sum. And then I also want to add pages, and that's going to summarize. And so that shows all of that. And then I can just do reading rate, and it's just pages. Whoops. Pages divided, oh my goodness. Pages divided by days. And there we go. So this is actually kind of interesting. I actually read my fantasy novels faster in 2019 than I did in 2020. What fantasy novels did I read? Oh, okay. Yeah, no, these ones I blasted through pretty quick. But yeah, so I'll just go down and finish that. So I ended up reading a total of 310 days last year, which isn't super accurate because in East of Eden, I definitely took like a lot of couple day breaks, but it took me 171 days to read it. So, I mean, I was somewhat reading 310 days last year. But yeah, so I mean, as you can see, I was reading at about half the speed that I am this year, which, you know, makes sense because I've read just as many books halfway through this year as I read in the entirety of last year. So yeah, I don't know how many other people are interested in stats like these, but I think it's interesting and kind of fun. If you like have run stats like these and you have found any great little pieces of information, I would love for you to comment down below. But yeah, so I think you could see from here that I blast through romance novels pretty quick. My kind of average reading pace is about 40 pages. I read nonfiction a little slower. This was a literary fiction, so I definitely read that way slower, and a classic, I suppose. I also did another 2020 pivot table without Harry Potter in it. Oh, I guess this is probably something good to mention. The way I actually filtered Harry Potter out of this pivot table was you can go down here to filters, and you can, so if you go to add filters, here, I'm just gonna get rid of my subgenre filter on this real quick, and then I can add it again and show you guys. So yeah, you can see my reading rate is, you know, the same up here. I haven't filtered anything out yet, but I figured I put in Harry Potter as fantasy and it's middle grade. I just read through it really fast because it was a reread and it's Harry Potter and blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to see kind of a less biased reading rate for just straight fantasy that I hadn't read before. So in 2020, I had this subgenre and I labeled all of the Harry Potter's fantasy middle grade. So when I go back to this, I can add a filter by subgenre, and then it just has little check marks next to all of my subgenres. I unclick middle grade and press OK, and then it gets rid of all the Harry Potters. And my more true reading rate of fantasy is 32 pages per day. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. If you liked it, like this video. If you didn't like it, I probably won't be doing very many of these stats reviews, but I love numbers, I love rates, I love math, so it was just kind of something fun for me to look at and try, and I would highly suggest anybody who's into learning more about their reading style to at least do a year or two just to get a feel for what kind of reading you do, what kind of reading you really enjoy. I mean, as you can see, I read romance really, really fast. It is something I know I enjoy. If I get sucked into a fantasy, I can read it really fast. I mean, just comparing like individual books that I know I really, really enjoyed. Like The Kiss Quotient, loved that book, read it so fast. If we go back into 2019, these Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles and Circe, I read those both pretty quick. Cinder I blasted through. Cress, I think this is over a weekend, so I must have just been home alone that weekend and just did nothing but read. So I think, you know, stats can provide a lot of insight for things you might have not realized before. So I think this was a worthwhile exercise, and I hope you enjoyed going through these stats with me. Catch you on the next video. Bye.